Good evening, Moscow. Thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you taking time to talk a little hockey. I am not Bob Fallon, as you saw on the screen. I am Aaron Westendorf. I had the pleasure of working with Bob for 4 years at the United States Hockey League. And we are thankful for the American Center in Moscow to put on this conversation today. Bob will be talking about his business experience throughout hockey, sharing some stories. And we have an underlying theme today for what is really special about the sport and the business. It's about that connectiveness in the community that has supported Bob and I personally, professionally, ultimately pays our bills, it supports our families. But I always think back to one of the things that I fell in love with hockey, and that was the tradition of shaking hands after a playoff series, win or lose, the mutual respect between quote unquote enemies going to battle, doing what they do for their teammates, for their family, for everything. And then at the end of it all, in the hardest moment as you lose or win, you're shaking your opponent's hand, looking them in the eye. And I think that goes on and off the ice of within hockey, business executives and everything. Why we fall in love with it and work in it is that mutual respect. Whether you agree, disagree, the longevity of these careers and the community that supports one another, it's just that respect of the shaking of hands. And I know you're going to battle for what you believe in, and I'm doing the same. So with that, I want to transition to Bob. Bob, that's one of the things I fell in love with hockey, and what's kept me in the business so long. But let's hear it from you. How'd you fall in love with hockey, and what makes it so special?
Well said, Aaron. I mean, one of the things that, just touching on what you said is, the sport of hockey and the relationships that I've, enjoyed through the years, crosses cultures and crosses oceans. And the fact that we're sitting here today with an audience in Moscow is a direct result of my experience in working with members of the Russian Hockey Federation and the Russian hockey media, many of which are still friends today. Hockey's been an important part of my life for my entire life. My dad played pro hockey here in the United States, and I was introduced to the game as a young man. And when I moved my family as an adult with kids to Minnesota, which is arguably considered the epicenter of ice hockey in the United States, I became really entwined with the sport as well, both from a personal perspective with raising my kids in hockey. Both of them played collegiately here in the United States, but also from a work perspective. I've been involved with the game since the 1980s. So I think that most of us can recall the tremendous Olympic event and the shock and awe of the 1980 Olympics, which exposed, I think, ice hockey to a much broader audience here in the United States. And ironically, before that game, I was already a fan of the Red Army Hockey Club, which was widely regarded then and now as one of the finest clubs ever assembled in the history of the sport. So I was following the Larianos and the Krutoffs and Tretiaks and everything long before most Americans.
So it's interesting, and you bring up 1980, and it's still something in America that we see all the time. The Wheaties box and how important that team was to the sport of hockey growing. For a lot of Americans, looking back to that, there's a couple different landscape things that I notice. One, in 1980, the game happened, and a lot of people knew the result, but were getting phone calls back of, "You got to go turn the game on TV. You're not going to believe what happens." And they knew the end result, and they go back and watch it on TV. Nowadays, you've got streaming packages and social media and websites. You typically can't get away from the live game. But two, coming into the business right around the 80s, you probably saw sports marketing, the power behind the athletes and teams, and the money that some of the businesses invested around sports and why it matters so much to households and Americans. And tell us a little bit about the beginning there, because as I understand it, your professional start came around a lot of advertising and sales and engaging that sports community for bigger businesses that were interested in the athletes and teams.
Yep. Ironically, I got my start not in ice hockey, but in professional tennis, women's tennis specifically, and team tennis. I worked for a woman who's a first ballot Hall of Famer, Billie Jean King, who at the time was the president of an organization in Chicago that ran women's tournaments for the professional circuit. So I was involved in the the sale of tickets and sponsorships and television production with Billy for a number of years before I transitioned to a job with actually some people I was introduced to through Billy, an organization called International Management Group, IMG, being at the time the foremost powerhouse in sports marketing on a global basis, representing the top athletes in Formula One, tennis, golf, you name it, football, baseball, and did that for a number of years. And it's really interesting how the whole sports marketing thing is just exploded in recent decades. And back in the 70s and 80s, sports marketing was a real niche. And you had your beer companies and your car companies that wanted to promote their brands through sport, but you didn't really get a lot of products and services that weren't targeted at a specific demographic of young men. Nowadays, it's virtually every product category known to man that is aligned with sports. And the sports have gotten so big in terms of their coverage from a media perspective that the properties themselves have, grown exponentially in terms of value. You have, players at the time in the 80s, if you were signed to $1 million contract, it was a big deal. I think that's the league minimum in the National Hockey League now. And you have players making in excess of $10 million a year. And on a global basis, obviously with Formula One, you have drivers making in excess of 20 or 25 million a year in salary, not to begin with even with the personalized sponsorships that they have. So, the sport world has grown exponentially. The value of the business, in terms of sports and entertainment, has become a central thread of brand marketing, and it as well because of your work with USA Hockey.
Yeah, and it's funny. So your first job out the gate is with tennis, Billie Jean King, and now fast forward to today, she's a major leader in the professional women's hockey league coming to North America with cities in the U.S. and Canada. And as a tennis star, you fast forward a couple decades, and she's working in the sport that you're working in now. So it's
Unbelievable.
You're already starting to see that theme of relationships and respect, and you never know who you're going to meet down the road and how important they are to the sport that we love. And so we're talking about sports marketing and the increase, and you're starting to see it kind of 80s, 90s. Your next career move is interesting within the media world and working with media companies. But really what we see behind the curtain is the value that sports brings is that it's a unique audience, and sometimes it's a large audience. So for instance, in America, the NFL, by far a much larger player than the NHL because of how many households in America turn on football on Sunday. Now, the NHL obviously has large market power relative to a lot of different advertisers because they can bring corporations into the household. So a lot of times what you and I are talking to with businesses is the audience, the people that read and watch and love the sport. So your transition to media, a lot of people might think that you're getting involved in the articles being written or the authors, but let's dive into what is the business around your thinking at the time and how you got that introduction. You and I know it's through a USA Hockey meeting by chance, but what did that world look like for you as you made the transition?
Yeah, so as you spoke, I was at the time working for IMG, and my supervisor was a member of the U.S. Marketing Council, which was a part of USA Hockey and trying to market amateur hockey and Team USA throughout the United States and throughout the world. And I attended a meeting on an invitation from this gentleman who was on the council, and he said, "Listen, I'd like to get more involved with your background in hockey." And I was just coming off some work on behalf of the NHLPA and the Canada Cup in 1991, where I was a promoter for events here in the United States between Team USA and Russia and Finland and a few other nations. But I came into this meeting, and they were going to, they were discussing the cancellation of the magazine due to cost. And as a magazine that was distributed to all the households that were belonged to USA Hockey. So your local youth hockey clubs, much like you have in Moscow with, teams like Krylia Sovetov and, the Red Army, they have clubs that go all the way down to youth. So here in the United States, we don't have pro teams that are aligned with youth, but we have very, very robust youth hockey organizations throughout the United States and over 500,000 young players. So there was a publication that was going out to them USA Hockey was, analyzing their finances on it and said, this is costing too much money. And this is, Aaron, these are in the days before the internet. So I'm that old. We analyzed and said, guys, this is a big mistake to even consider doing this. This is your only means of communicating with your constituent base, your players, your officials, your coaches, your parents, and your sponsors. And instead, why don't we look at how we can make it more of a financial success? So long story short, coming out of that meeting, I met the publisher, and months later, we teamed together to buy the company and create USA Hockey Magazine, which today is the world's most widely distributed publication, full color, glossy, and exponentially increased the advertising and reach of that publication. And we became a media company that was focused on hockey. We not only did the USA Hockey publication, but regional publications in Minnesota and Massachusetts and some other markets. But we also did the marketing for amateur hockey in the state of Minnesota, which I said before is arguably the epicenter. It's the Toronto of hockey here in Minnesota, like Toronto is for Canada and like Moscow is for Russia. If you want to know more about hockey and see hockey at every level, played at the highest levels, Minnesota is the place to be in the United States. So coming out of that was kind of interesting because it really showed us that there was a market for the consumption of hockey media. And, you're involved with it today. Look how far it's come in terms of the digital assets for hockey. You could literally find on any given night on either on broadband or on broadcast, you can find a hockey game at virtually every level anywhere in the world. So recently I had my son's teammates from college, a couple of them played in the KHL, one for Jokerit in Finland and another for I can't remember the name in the KHL, but I'm tuning into games on the KHL.ru on the English version to watch KHL hockey in my living room in Minnesota. So the sport has exploded from a media standpoint, and the content that's available to fans is amazing.
I want to pause real quick and remind everyone, if you have questions, we will do a Q&A at the end, but we are keeping an eye on the chat. If you have questions as we move along, I'll make sure to bring them up with Bob as we discuss. If you have questions about American hockey, the business, one of the very important questions, I think we're talking to a younger audience, younger professional audience that maybe one day dreams of working in hockey, whether it's selling tickets, being a broadcaster, equipment managers, all the important jobs that put together a hockey team. I think one of the very important questions to understand the answer to is when you're talking to the owner of a team or the business function of a team, and they're looking at, marketing or media, none of this stuff is free. It's actually can be quite expensive to invest in, especially as you look to buy advertisement, to sell tickets, to get the notoriety of the team around with local audiences. How do you explain or justify to those business functions the investment around spending money for photos and videos and the really cool video shoots and advertisements that people love? How do you justify the expense around that?
Well, you and I experienced that obviously somewhat at the United States Hockey League and later on with USA Hockey yourself. But to me, it's all about the modern way to build a brand and the way that young consumers consume sports and entertainment is largely through content. And you have to keep pace with the content that is going to pull people in. So, one example I like to give people is the property that you and I developed, the United States Hockey League, which was the e-newsletter, where we obtain the ticket list of each of our member clubs, 16 or actually 17 member clubs. With the agreement, we're not going to just give these names away. We simply wanted to send them an e-newsletter, not on the specific teams, but on the league itself, which, the league didn't do a heck of a lot of marketing at the team level. So, markets like Chicago or Madison or Sioux Falls didn't have a lot of marketing for the league as much as they had their respective teams. And, I had some pushback from some of our owners going, why are we doing this? And I said, guys, it's all about elevating the brand of the United States Hockey League to the upper echelons of junior hockey, not only here in North America, but in the world. I was a strong believer then, and I am now, that the United States Hockey League is the top junior league in the world, not only in terms of how they produce outstanding hockey players, but how they produce young men and women now for, the next step in their lives beyond hockey. One of the things I like most about the USHL, for those of you who don't know, in Moscow, you obviously have the MHL there in Russia, and there's the CHL in Canada. Is the United States Hockey League here in the United States maintains amateur eligibility for its participants. So 95% or more, if I'm not mistaken, Aaron, of the players in the United States Hockey League go on to play college hockey. So many of the stars that you recognize, in the National Hockey League today, whether it's Johnny Gaudreau at Columbus, or I don't even know, there's dozens and dozens of names of people in the National Hockey League that matriculated there from college. Many of these folks can fall back on their education once their hockey career is over. So, getting back to that whole content thing, is building the brand is all about giving consumers an inside look at the sport itself, and kind of a behind the scenes look. And the things we created in the United States Hockey League, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but I think we went from a total of impressions of under 1 million to 10 million impressions or more a year, which is significant, which now makes the value of the franchises more valuable. So in our time there in the league, the value of the United States Hockey League franchises more than doubled. And that has a direct correlation to us helping to build the brand through content.
Handful of topics there, and it's all about just finding your target. What is the value, or what are you aiming to do? And then what is the investment to get there? So if it's spreading the word and attracting more players, increasing value and notoriety, increasing ticket sales, what is that end goal? And then how do you get there? What's the smartest investment around it? Now, going back to our original theme of relationships and how that works within the hockey world, but also professionally, how it's helped you. We got a little sneak preview of the USHL, but in between your media background in the USHL, you work with CCM Hockey, which many people watching the American Center in Moscow will relate to the athletes around, Ovechkin, Panarin. I think Kaprizov is a CCM athlete. Mm-hmm. But you had to stop at CCM Hockey, who was investing advertising in the magazine. They saw the target audience of hockey families throughout America getting this magazine, and they wanted to put their brand forefront in their living room. So your stop in CCM, the relationship between the magazine and then how it led you to the USHL, what was that window of your life like?
Yeah. So after, we had purchased the publishing company, I want to say in 95 or 96, I think it was 96 was when we closed on the deal. We were ultimately purchased by an organization out of New York, which, gave a nice payday for myself and our other owners, but, we, didn't need as many chiefs in the company as we had previously. So I moved on to the hockey equipment side of things, and Reebok CCM at the time was the largest manufacturer of hockey equipment in the world, battling out against a brand called Bauer. So, we had offices in Moscow and Oslo, or not Oslo, Stockholm, all over the world. And I reported to some people in Montreal, but I ran the marketing here in the United States for our retail establishments and our league relationships, with the exception of the National Hockey League. I worked primarily on the American League, the NCAA, which is collegiate hockey here in the United States, and some of the junior leagues and minor pro leagues. So, again, it's that connectivity. I don't wind up at CCM unless I'm involved with, the publications and hockey media. And I certainly don't wind up at the USHL without my work at the CCM company. The brand was a sponsor of the USHL, and that's how I got exposed to the ownership and the executive committee of the United States Hockey League, is through my work at CCM. But that was, a really interesting journey with the product. These products now, you have skates that are over $1,000 a piece. And I remember actually on one of my trips to Russia is actually trying to tour retail stores, hockey retail stores in Moscow. And it's a completely different feel versus North America. I mean, the inventory isn't nearly as broad. in Russia as it is here in North America. And these stores in North America are absolutely massive. You have, stores now that are 60, 70, 80, almost 100,000 square feet of retail space devoted to hockey, which again, 20, 30 years ago would have been considered absurd.
And I'm sure we'll see changes on the e-commerce side as all that
Hmm.
changes. And I've seen some 3D mapping and printing with skates, custom fit and around
Yeah.
ankles. If you're going to spend that kind of money on equipment, you better get a return out of it. I want to bring up another question that probably some young professionals would find valuable. So we've kind of traveled through sales background, media background. You talked about buying and selling a company, working for an advertiser. At some point in your career, you're dealing with conflict and people that don't see eye to eye with you or want to challenge you to push maybe the outcome or to really challenge and see if this is the best way forward. How do you manage those moments of conflict in order to maintain these relationships over time as you're moving to different opportunities and navigating the hockey world from the business side?
I have a simple rule of thumb is just to understand your own DNA. What's your makeup? What are your moral compasses? Don't compromise your ethics or your morals or your integrity over the opinions of others. And I think that over time, what that does is help solidify your reputation as a trusted operator in the business. One of the things I'm most thankful for are the relationships that I've been able to cultivate in the sport. Whether it's at the National Hockey League office with Commissioner Bettman and Associate Commissioner Bill Daly, or the folks at the NCAA. Many of the folks that are involved with promoting college hockey, a lot of the equipment companies. I mean, there's a lot of really good people involved in our sport, as you are well aware. Many of our mutual friends at USA Hockey, and some of the relationships we've cultivated over the years through amateur hockey as well. So, to me, it's all about sticking to your values, and generally, things will work out for you if there's conflict. The bottom line is, if you think you're right and you've got the facts to back it up, carry forward. Don't compromise what you believe to just make make money, or to uh, um, solve an issue, a short-term issue. Because long-term, if you're stepping outside of your value system, it's not very good for your career in the future.
I like that. And, there's a lot of excitement when you're young and you're coming into the profession, and all of a sudden you get pulled in all these different directions, different opinions. You're not quite sure which compass to follow.
Hmm.
And it's never your own, right? You have bosses, you have people pull you aside and mentors. And really it is about that consistency of finding that within yourself. What do you want to do? What do you want to deliver? What can you deliver? But when it starts at this cool place of being a fan of the sport or just fan of the business, many people listening to this call might want to get into hockey, but like you, will work in a different sport first. But finding that consistency, and then people know that they can rely on you. And like you said, it kind of works itself out, right?
Absolutely. And I also think, follow your passion. I'm going to butcher this, but there's an adage that goes something like, once you find a job that is your true passion, it doesn't even feel like a job anymore. For me, a lot of the jobs I've had in the hockey world, it wasn't difficult getting up in the morning and getting to the office and working as many hours as I needed to get the job done, because I was excited to be there. And I wanted to be there because I was in a sport that meant a lot to me personally and professionally. As you know, both of my children played. I still play. I had been playing old man hockey for a long time because I'm an old guy, but it's fun watching the relationships. One of the things I shared with my children at their young ages, I said, 99.9% of the people who play this game will not play it for a living, but 100% of them, I guarantee you, can play it for fun for the rest of their life. So I feel the same way about some of the relationships that we've created over the years with some of the people, whether it's with the Russian Hockey Federation or USA Hockey or Hockey Canada. It's just great to work with people that share a passion for growing a game we all love.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so we're going to get into the passion. This is where you and I intersect now. You're at CCM, you get offered a unique opportunity. I think it's more unique in the aspect that your son played in the league that you're now being offered to be the president of. The title slide introduced you as former president commissioner of USHL, and there's probably a bunch of different misconceptions of what a president or commissioner does for a hockey league. You're not playing, you're not going down to the ice. It's a lot of boardrooms and business decisions, but you find this opportunity, and maybe we'll get a couple laughs out of this. The first time I get hired over the phone, I've never met you in person. I'm lucky enough that you see some potential in me. I'm young in Chicago, 24 years old. I come in for my first day of work. I'm in a full suit, probably overdressed, but that's what you do on your first day.
Absolutely.
And my boss, Bob, is laying on the floor. And I'm in an apartment. It's not so much an office, but a 2-bedroom apartment with a bathroom and a kitchen. And my boss is on the floor, and I meet you, and I don't know if I should run or if this is going to be the best job of my life.
Yeah. So just so we can clarify for our listeners, when I took the job, my apartment was not ready yet. So the only place, and there was, the hotels were insanely expensive, and we were on the USHL budget, my travel budget, if you will. So I got an inflatable mattress and put it in the office, in my office, which had a little shower and everything. So my apartment for 2 weeks was my office. And you know what? Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. It's
but that's passion, right? You're willing to make
Absolutely.
any sacrifice. Your family's moving down from Minnesota. Your wife,
Yep.
she's got a career too.
Yep.
There's an interesting aspect of you and I talking about our careers, but there's this parallel of family life and business. And I've lived in maybe 12 houses in the last 10 years. I don't know if my wife likes that or not. There's this human aspect to the business too that goes into the relationships, the longevity.
100%. And it's kind of an interesting twist here with the connection to Russia is that first week I was in Chicago, I got a call from somebody that knew I was a huge fan of the Red Army Hockey Club and said, listen, there's a film at the Chicago Film Festival that had won an award at Cannes, a documentary called Red Army, and it was produced by a gentleman by the name of Gabe Polsky. So I rushed down to try to get a ticket, and to my shock and surprise, there was this line around the block, and the movie was sold out. So I was a little bit panicked, but calling on my experience as a salesman, and connected with some people. I called a guy by the name of Scott McPherson, who at the time was a business consultant to the Russian Hockey Federation out of Boston. And Scott McPherson said, listen, I'll try to get you into this film. There's the poster for the film, but this was a groundbreaking film about the use of sport by the then Soviet Union to, promote their way of life and communist power through sports. And it was an amazing documentary. But I couldn't get into the film. It was sold out. So I call Scott McPherson. He goes, well, I'm not there, but my buddy Slava is. And I'm like, Slava who? And he's like, Slava Fetisov. And I'm like, as in Slava Fetisov, the first ballot Hall of Famer, captain of multiple world championship teams, captain of multiple Olympic teams for the Central Red Army Hockey Club. I said, there's no way I'm calling him to try to get into a movie. And
it'd be like calling Ovechkin now to try to get tickets.
Exactly. And Scott, to his credit, said, listen, you're the one that called me. You wanted to get in. Either call Slava or don't get in. So he gives me Slava's phone number. I'm nervous. I'm like, I don't know if I should be doing this or not, but you know what? I really want to see this movie. Pick up the phone, dial the number, and I'm looking around because Scott has told me that Slava's there to meet the media and promote the film. So I'm kind of looking around. I kind of vaguely know what Slava Fetisov looks like. Next thing I know, I hear this click, click, and a woman picks up the phone, and I realize I just called Moscow, and it's the middle of the night. And Slava's wife answers. She goes, "Who's this?" And I said, "A friend of Scott McPherson's." She says, "I figured as much." And she hands the phone to Slava. I, apologize profusely to this international superstar for waking him up in the middle of the night. He couldn't have been more friendly. He's like, "Listen, it happens all the time. I'm, between here in North America and Europe, all over the place. So, it happens." So long story short, he got me into the movie, and I kind of lingered afterwards. And as I was rushing out the door, I had thrown on a ball cap for my son's hockey program at Yale University. not knowing that the producer of this film, Red Army, Gabe Polsky, played hockey at Yale University. So one thing leads to another. During the media session, he comes over and introduces himself. We talk, and after a couple of weeks of getting to know each other, he actually hired me to do some sidebar stuff for the promotion of Red Army. As a employee of the United States Hockey League, I couldn't take remuneration from him. So what I did instead is went to our client at USA Hockey and said, I got a great idea for a fundraiser for the USA Hockey Foundation. Why don't we do some theater promotions in key hockey markets to promote the USA Hockey Foundation and bring in members of the 1980 U.S. Olympic team that won gold medal in Lake Placid, and contrast it with some players from the Russian Federation and Slava Fetisov. So we did some of these events that were the largest theater opening events for the Red Army film. And Gabe and I are friends still today over what happened with Red Army. And he later launched another film that was related to this called Red Penguins, which was dealing with the purchase of the Red Army Hockey Club, or I should say a partial purchase of the Red Army from the Pittsburgh Penguins of the National Hockey League. After the communism fell in 1990 or 91, I believe, the Russian Federation didn't have a lot of money to pay the players, and there was a little bit of confusion and whatnot. So they accepted this investment, and it was really the first attempt at Western sports marketing in Russia and the Soviet Union in history. So it was a really interesting film, a little controversial because there's some pretty interesting things that occurred along the way, but fascinating film as well. And I'm still friends with Gabe and the people that Steve Warshaw, who is the president of the Red Penguins Hockey Club. It was a young man that went there from Pittsburgh. Steve and I are still in contact. And unfortunately, we were trying to promote this film and set up a bunch of really great events, including one here in Minneapolis with the Russian Museum of Russian Art. And everything got canceled because all the theaters were closed due to the COVID pandemic. So sometimes luck's not on your side in the sports and entertainment world.
Well, we have the pictures going. Bob and I actually traveled with the Chicago Steel. Bob also traveled a second time with the Sioux City Musketeers, two teams from the USHL. And I do want to get back to the USHL. I think there's some valuable conversation
absolutely.
With the branding. But one of the unique aspects of the USHL, that's 16-year-olds to 20-year-olds. So a lot of, similar age of who's listening to the call right now. So many of these kids have maybe traveled a little bit close to their home. They come to Chicago. They're on a team that's now going to go to Russia. They've maybe never traveled outside their home state. If they have, it's to Chicago. They've never gone to Europe. They've never gone to Asia. We spent a lot of time with the 16 to 20-year-olds about the cultural development and help them understand this relationship building, cultural understanding, learning, because I think the best thing that you can do in life is travel and learn how different people live, how they talk, what they like to eat. I think that's just kind of fun as a sidebar, but let's talk about that importance, because when I look back at that roster, there's 3 or 4 players in the NHL now. One of them, Nick Olchuk, is a national broadcaster for the Seattle Kraken. Mark Johnstone's a captain in the minor league level. A lot of these kids have gone on to do hockey things nationally, internationally, and they have this experience as a teenager, experiencing a new country. And there's a handful of players that are now business leaders and maybe vice presidents at companies. How important was that relationship building, the sightseeing, the cultural understanding to these teenagers?
Well, again, we consider ourselves more than a hockey league. It was about really developing young men for the future of their life. And I credit our friends with the Russian Hockey Federation as well, Oksana Bokova, Dmitry Efimov, who was the commissioner at the time, who's still a dear friend, helping us to set up some sidebar tours, one of which both years, both with Sioux City and with Chicago, we took the team to this war museum in Moscow. It was absolutely breathtaking. And to watch these young men, these young American and Canadian men primarily, we had some Finnish and Swedish boys on these teams as well, but having them like experience this and understand, for example, that there were over 25 million Russian citizens and soldiers who lost their life in World War II absolutely blew people away. Because I mean, in comparison to the United States, it was, incredible. So I'll never forget. There's a young man by the name of Joe Snively who ultimately went to Yale University before playing in the National Hockey League. Was interviewed by Russian television on the steps of this war museum, and he almost had tears in his eyes. He was like, that was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And to see these young men take in this stuff, because, again, 95% of the kids in our league went on to play in college and obviously study in college. So to see these young men be exposed to something was truly special. The photo you're seeing now is, one of the things we wanted to do is to respect our hosts and respect the culture of our hosts. So with the Sioux City Musketeers and the Chicago Steel, we actually designed jerseys with our team names in acrylic, and we won an award for the best jersey there. That was Tyson Foods, which exports a lot of products into agricultural products into Russia and Eastern Europe, was our sponsor. And we one of my my great sources of pride are people like Dimitri there pictured, who's the president commissioner of the MHL, saying that our league did more marketing around this event and promotion of this event than all the other countries combined. And I think a lot of that, Aaron, comes from our belief that, first of all, it was an amazing event that was created by the Russian Federation, but it was an opportunity to really showcase the amazing skill of these athletes from all over the world. And having the opportunity for the Sioux City Musketeers and the Chicago Steel to play against, teams like the Red Army U-20 team in Moscow was an absolute highlight. I think there was a photo there of me trying to give away tickets near Red Square. And one of the funniest things, there I am. I didn't have nearly as much success as the young players who we let loose on Red Square. And one of the folks from the Russian Federation came up to me and said, if it keeps going like this, we're going to set a record for female attendees at a hockey game, because all the boys were exclusively giving tickets to pretty girls in Red Square. So I thought that was kind of a funny moment. But again, it was just unbelievable experience. We were treated very, very well. The folks we met, as I said, people like Oksana Boykova, who still works for the Federation, Masha Bass, who at the time was the hockey anchor for Match TV. She moved over to Channel 1 now. She's an international star on there's Masha right there. So that's an image of her. She came over to Chicago and did a shout out to me for introducing her to the folks at the Chicago Blackhawks. And there's another photo of Masha with a player right there. That's Artemi Panarin, who at the time played for the Blackhawks. Now was with the New York Rangers. But Artemi was profusely thankful for me allowing to get a media pass for Masha, who again is a international star and recognized by all the Russian players. And he goes, what can I do to thank you for bringing my friend to Chicago? And I said, I'd like that hat. And that hat he's wearing right now, I've owned ever since that date. So I wear it proudly. It's one of my favorite ice fishing hats when it's really, really cold. It keeps me warm.
It's funny, from that trip, you would think, all right, so I live in Ohio now. I've traveled a little bit, but I still meet people that I've met from that trip in Russia, and I see them in hockey rinks at different tournaments, friends along the way. And sometimes I'll get a look. How do you know that person? And it's just by chance that I was able to get that trip. And it was really cool. We had amazing hosts. We had great food the entire time, and it was really cool to see. We were in Yekaterinburg the year that you and I went with Chicago and spent some time in Moscow for some scrimmages. And it was just very cool to spend time in Russia.
Absolutely. How about our host at Krylia Sovetov, the Soviet Wings organization? Couldn't have been more welcoming. They showed up at our practices. We had little Russian youth hockey players at all of our practices. A lot of them wanted sticks and everything from the USHL.
From the big kids, right? When you see high school and college kids, you want to be like them one day. And it was cool to interact with them. And one of the coolest things, and you guys set that bar as well as the coaches, but all the adults in the room, we were teaching kids about respect, and that's where it really started. And you leave a locker room cleaner than what you got to it. You treat everyone with respect around you. If you need help finding a bathroom, ask nicely. And every team I've been with since has always followed that rule. And it's something that I think USA Hockey takes pride in when they teach kids that you're an ambassador for the country when you travel, because you never know when you're going to see these people again or have relationships down the road. They might be your teammate one day.
Absolutely.
And that kind of goes with the theme of respect and
Yeah.
the cultural connection that we have through the career in hockey.
Well, it's funny that connectivity continues to this day. That young lady pictured there, Masha Bass, who works for Channel One, called me up a couple of years ago and said, "Hey, listen, I have a friend moving to Minnesota," and I, assumed it was a friend in business or whatever. He doesn't know anybody. Can I give him your number? I'm like, "Sure." What's his name? Kirill Kaprizov. I'm like, Kirill, as in the Russian superstar who scored the game-winning goal in the Olympics. Yeah, yeah. So long story short, Masha was doing a expose on Russian players in the United States in terms of what they do and how they're acclimating to American culture as members of their National Hockey League team. So Sergei Bobrovsky in Florida, Artemi Panarin in New York, I think Tarasenko in St. Louis, and then Kirill in here in Minnesota. And I said, "Well, what can I do to help you?" She goes, "Well, Kirill is an outdoorsman and he doesn't know anybody. And, Minnesota he likes because it's very much like his home in Siberia." So long story short, we got a fishing guide and took Kirill out on the water, and he had an absolute blast. The first 5 minutes, he was kind of quiet, but he got, effusively happy the more he started fishing, and afterwards said, "I'd like to do that again." So, oddly enough, I got to know his agent, and we're actually working on a program to see if we can't align Kirill with promoting fishing tourism here in Minnesota. Because even though he doesn't speak great English, he loves to fish and he loves the outdoors, and he's a beloved athlete here in Minnesota.
I was going to say, more importantly, the people love him in Minnesota.
No doubt.
I don't see any questions yet, but we have about 15 minutes left. I do want to end talking about the importance of branding and what some of that looked like. Taking a notorious brand, something that people already know and love, and changing it, maybe the look of it or the feel of it or how it gets talked about. Interested to look back at your time in the USHL, and for the people watching back, some notorious players that have played in the league. Andrei Svechnikov played for a year in Muskegon. Jan Kuznetsov, recently drafted by the Calgary Flames, played in Sioux Falls, and went on to play at the University of Connecticut. Andre went straight to the draft after playing in Canada for a year. So you're looking at a league, 16 and 20-year-olds. They're trying to play in college, will most likely play in college, but are trying to get drafted by the NHL. You've got these regional markets, and every city's different, and every business plan is different. How do you summarize all of that and become a leader, a president of all those factions, and guide the league into one place, even though at times it might seem like the league wants to go in maybe 3 or 4 different places?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with sitting down with the leadership of the league, which are the owners. In any league you're in, whether it's the National Hockey League or the American Hockey League or the KHL, ultimately the team owners have a vision for what they want the league to go. And it was my job to craft a strategy that met their vision for how they wanted to grow the brand. I think that the reason I was successfully, chosen from a number of candidates is I had a plan because I had a passion for the league. You had mentioned previously that my son had played in it, but I really believed in the pathway for maintaining eligibility for these young men and for building the brand for what it was, which was a great place for these young guys to not only develop themselves as hockey players, but develop themselves as human beings. And we thought that was something that various brands in the United States would want to attach to, and we were right. So we managed to launch the first ever national broadcast property for the USHL. We launched the first ever e-store for the USHL. A lot of that with your help, Aaron, and certainly the first, e-newsletter and everything. So seeing the entire brand grow the way it did, working with guys like you and Evan and Doug and a number of other folks we had a nice little unit, and we all believed in what we were doing, and had a lot of fun doing it.
It's fascinating to look back at that time in the era. Some of the people that worked in our office, Adam Micheletti went on to be a president of the Lincoln Stars, a team in our league. Doug is now a commissioner for the ECAC, which is a league commissioner president role at a college league institute. Evan now has gone away from hockey, private equity investment. Stephanie Morgan, who was one of our early hires, is now one of the most senior ranking women in all of U.S. sport, as well as hockey. And some of the coaches, some of the players that have gone on to do incredible things. What was in that magic, or how did people pull themselves towards the story that you were telling, maybe, and then how did that help them along later on?
And that's a good point. And you look at it, and this is maybe, a message for the audience there is you just never know where an opportunity is going to take you. And you talk about some of these guys trying to, forge a career in coaching, starting out with, a minor junior program and getting an assistant job in the USHL, and then getting a head job at the USHL, and then getting a assistant job with a college. And it's just fun to watch. Looking at these guys that were assistant coaches in the USHL and head coaches now on the benches for National Hockey League teams. So, there's a lot of stick to it, mentality. Whereas if it's something you want to do, stick to it, and you never know where your opportunities are going to come.
All right, we have a question from the audience, and I like this one a lot. It's about, how has the popularity of hockey in the U.S. evolved over time, particularly from 1980 to today? And I'll tell you why I like this question. Obviously, USA Hockey, gold medals, chasing, the growth of the women's sport, the dominance of the sled team. I love all that. But what's interesting is the USHL, if I'm not mistaken, started off in 1979. And some of the historians that worked with us said the league almost went bankrupt and didn't exist after its first year. It ran out of money to host the games, and then they switched their path to, focus on high school kids, maybe going towards college. It's grown into today. But could you imagine hockey in the early 70s before the 1980? And the U.S. won a gold medal in 1960. But the fanaticism around the 1980 and how it grew for the USHL too, so that it could exist, so that American hockey makes college hockey players. There's this whole nother layer of hockey going on in America now since 1980.
Well, and to the question, I mean, there's evidence that what happened is all this exposure back then. The amazing thing about that broadcast is a tape of the entire game of Russia USA in 1980 does not exist. Somehow ABC accidentally erased it. True story. But just looking at the expansion of interest, and then as the game continued to grow, you have teams developing in Los Angeles and Anaheim and Dallas and Florida. And before you know it, it's truly a national sport. And the ratings, and I give a lot of credit to the National Hockey League for really focusing on trying to grow the sport, not only through the expansion of their teams, but through the expansion of participation. You have some of the most successful youth hockey organizations in states like Arizona, California, and Florida, and Texas that literally did not exist 30 years ago. And they're some of the most successful in producing high talent in the United States now, which, again, it's all part of the growth of the game.
And we're almost talking about areas that maybe the technology didn't exist to keep the ice good enough to skate on. People coming from the beach and flip-flops going on and putting skates on now. Another question from the audience. Do you think there would be demand around in the U.S. for an NHL versus a KHL team? And I think this is interesting because we're already kind of seeing some unique ways of getting international competition into the U.S. World Cup of Hockey. You talked about your experience with the Canada Cup. What does it mean to U.S. audiences when they see something like that and the demand around it?
Yeah, a short answer is absolutely. As a sidebar, one of the things I was trying to do with my friend Dmitry Efimov, who is the former commissioner of the MHL, we actually worked together to try to put together a touring group from the Ukrainian national team. But it fell through. But I really think with the globalization of the sport, there would be a market for bringing some KHL teams over here for a friendship tour, an exhibition tour. there are markets like Chicago and New York that have massive. Minneapolis has a massive Russian American population. I think here in Minnesota, there's over 50,000 Russian Americans in the Twin Cities. So I think that there's a market for that. And I would certainly be willing to discuss that with anybody as far as bringing over some of those teams, because there's some really good hockey players in the K.
And I think anytime you see international competition, anytime it's a country versus a country, not even just team versus team, but you can get a casual fan or maybe someone who doesn't know anything about hockey and sit down on the couch and watch it for a couple hours because they automatically know which team they're rooting for, which teams they're not.
No doubt. And the thing is, again, you look at the KHL now, which has become a much more international league as well. You have Americans, Canadians, Swedes, and Finns playing on those teams. So, the K has done an excellent job of marketing themselves as well. There's a website here, KHL en, where you can get English language news on KHL. I actually have a hat from a Russian team that one of my sons played for that everybody asked, like, where the heck did you get that hat? But bought it off of a website that's available here in the United States. So I think there's actually kind of a small but loyal following for a number of the teams over there. And anybody who's attached to hockey knows who the Red Army is.
Question from the chat too. What would be the biggest difference between U.S. hockey and Russian hockey? And I'm kind of thinking along the lines of like the KHL, MHL development system versus how kids might develop in America. Big difference between that.
Yeah, I was involved a number of years ago in some development, the development of some development, hockey development, player development booklets and things like that, working with guys like Herb Brooks, who is the 1980 Olympic coach, and a guy by the name of Ted Brill, who was considered one of the top player development people here in the United States. And we studied a lot of what was going on in Europe and in Russia. And one of the things that really stuck out to me, and this is maybe 1995 or so, the average amount of games for a bantam, and here in the United States they're called bantams, that's your 14 and 15-year-olds. The average amount of games in Russia was like 14 games, and they had like 50 to 60 practices. Whereas it was almost, converse to that in the United States and Canada, where they were playing 40, 50, 60 games. And what USA Hockey worked on with the Russian Federation and some IIHF member organizations is a study on puck touches and things like that. And they found that the best players in the world, they did the study of the World Junior Championships, were the best, 19 and 20-year-olds in the world. The best players in the world were touching the puck, had the puck on their stick for less than a minute in a typical game, whereas in a typical practice, it could be on your stick for 15 to 20 minutes. So I think that, I'm a big believer. I have a good friend at USA Hockey, as you do as well, Lou Vero, who is a big proponent of Mr. Tarasov and his developmental theories on hockey. And I think that, I think Russian hockey and the player development from Russia has had an influence on player development here in the United States. You see a lot more emphasis on skating and creativity. Back in the day, a lot of North American hockey was about dumping the puck in, and in Europe, it was all about maintaining possession of the puck. So I think that's a direct influence to Europe and the Russian Federation.
It's interesting. There's a lot of respect and relationship building in order to go to different countries. I know USA Hockey spends time with Finland as well as gives back internationally and goes to different countries and helps set up programs. But that conversation piece and the learning and asking questions, and maybe you are brought in as the expert, but you're asking more questions because there's something to learn there. Or if you're not the expert and you're there to learn, asking questions so that you can gain knowledge. And it's that respect of the sharing and the passion and everything that goes into that.
Well, again, I'm a believer in the old adage that you never stop learning. And I don't care if you're the president of a company or, a clerk. You should always go to work with the mindset that you have something to learn that's going to improve your ability to do your job and to service your customers. So I found the same mindset with the coaches we met in Russia and the team administrators and the league administrators in Russia. Again, that the Junior Club World Cup that we played in as a league, we were designated by USA Hockey to represent the United States. was one of the best run hockey events I've ever been a part of, and I've been a part of a lot of them.
I know we're running close to the end on time. I want to make sure that we thank the American Center in Moscow again for putting on this conversation. I want to thank everyone for listening to us and listening to Bob share his hockey stories, his business stories. There's a couple things there at the end. I always like to make sure when I'm talking to younger audiences that they can walk away with something where they feel like they could carry that on for the rest of their life and learn from it and change it. What you talked about, learning new things. I always like to say, if you're young and ambitious and want to do something, read. Read as much as you can. Learn about different stuff. Read until you're bored. Give up that subject and then go for something else. Read and see what you stick to with your passion, and then ask questions, learn. Also goes into the hockey development side of practice. Just get out there, practice new things, master your craft, try to get better at no matter what you're doing. If you're on the ice, trying to become the best hockey player you are, you're practicing. If you're off the ice and you're trying to learn and be the best mathematician, the best teacher, the best surgeon,
Yep.
What are you doing to make yourself better? Bob, when you talk to younger audiences, do you usually have a story or advice to share? Maybe even as they look towards becoming professionals out in the workplace, what would you tell them to go do?
Follow your passion and make connections with people that can mentor you. I really feel lucky to have known a lot of people in the sports and business world that have spent time with me to help me learn. And again, it's all about learning and connecting with people that can get you to the places you want to go. Again, I'd like to thank the American Center in Moscow as well for the opportunity to talk to their audience tonight. And one of these days, I'd like to get back there for a hockey event in Russia.
Yeah, it's always fun, and the events and the people we see, NHL drafts, college games, junior hockey. You never know where hockey's going to take you and who you might see in those hallways. An important lesson to always maintain those relationships. Go to work with respect. Have the handshake at the end of the day, whether you agree with someone or not, as you're working alongside them. Hopefully, you have a common goal. Bob and the moderators, wasn't sure any more questions or anything else before we wrap up.
For those of you who are interested in following more about hockey here in North America, Aaron works for an organization called therinklive.com. So check them out.
Go to therinklive.com for some hockey news. Of course, follow NHL, all your favorite players from home. Follow Bob's work. Google him. You can usually find him. He's doing something. He's working on a lot of busy projects. Again, thank you to everyone for tuning in. We look forward to talking to you guys soon again one day. And we might see you in a hockey hallway.